Today's video is sponsored by Energy Sage. Take advantage of the winter in the Northern Hemisphere and plan your solar installation in time for peak energy generation potential next spring. We are in the middle of November in the Northern Hemisphere, and if you are someone who has photovoltaic solar panels on the roof of your home, you might have noticed that you're not really generating a whole lot of solar panel right about now. I mean, yesterday we made about 2.8 kilowatt hours of power on the roof throughout the day, which is massively different to the nearly 100 kilowatt hours that we generate in the peak daylight of late June. Granted, it was a really, really wet day, as it is today, and the previous day we generated nearly 12 kilowatt hours of power, but you get my drift. And if you're watching this and you're going, mid-November? But it was just Halloween. Yeah, I'm afraid you're stuck in the same trauma time vortex that some of us are also trapped in. It's okay. Take some time. Have something warm. Curl up next to a fire. Romance Karlak in BG3. Whatever you need to do for self-care. Seriously. Self-care is important. Why then am I talking about solar panels as we fast approach the winter solstice? And the answer is simple. With the US election mostly over, granted there are still a few undecided races to be called, we face a future federal government whose policies may be less generous when it comes to federal tax incentives for solar panel installations. And while there are plenty of people who watch this video in countries that aren't the US, you lucky sods, I think what's about to happen in the US could influence solar panels and renewable energy projects worldwide. I want to be really intentional in what I say and how I say it in this video. And I am also aware that there's a massive number of people who will accuse me of delving into personal politics in covering this topic. And I want you to know I'm going to try and do my absolute best to explain what we think is likely moving forward for the solar industry using the previous Trump White House and some of the campaign statements made by the Trump campaign this time around to give some best guess at this time ruminations on why it's best to get solar set up now rather than wait. And the first thing I want to reiterate here is that it is, I hope, obvious that you shouldn't be putting yourself into financial difficulties to rush into installing solar panels if you are not in a financial position to be able to afford it. The usual common sense things here about consulting with a financial advisor before making a massive investment all come into play. And believe me, even with incentives as they stand right now in November 24, solar panels are still a massive investment, especially if you opt for anything more than a small solar system and you're paying a professional to put it on your home. Today's video sponsor, Energy Sage, can help you with navigating that process and getting quotes, but I'm going to come to them later in the video. Let's start with where things are right here, right now. And aside from giving myself an earworm from saying that phrase, it's important to remember that for the next 60-ish days, President Joe Biden is still the US president, and we are now firmly into the lame duck period where it's unlikely any major legislative changes will take place. And that means that right now, the US federal government is offering a 30% solar tax credit on all eligible solar installations in the US. It's not a point of sale credit as it now is for EVs, but if you are a taxpayer and you file your taxes next year, you will be eligible, based on current tax law, to claim a tax credit equivalent to 30% of the total installed cost of your system. That's all thanks to the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, which in its current guise steps down solar panel tax credits to 26% in 33, 22% in 34, and then expires completely in 35. Oh, and if your tax liability is less than the credit, there are also provisions for tax rollovers at the current time. To be eligible, you'll need to install your solar panels, and if you are installing a battery backup system, your battery backup system at either your primary or secondary property, and the system must be one that meets all the minimum qualifications set out by the IRS in terms of safety certification and performance. And to be clear, this incentive applies for eligible solar and battery, or just battery installations for your home. Again, though, it is worth consulting with an expert before signing on to install something, just to make sure the system you're considering actually meets all of the tax credit criteria. And I want to be really clear here that right now there are no immediate threats to those credits before the end of the current administration. So if you can get your solar installed before the end of the year, or at least before the rules change, you should be just fine, which is why I'm making this video. And this is important. We know that the first Trump presidency wasn't defined by progressive policies focused on making American homes more energy efficient, less energy dependent, and more resilient, all things that solar panels can help you on the path towards, even if the first part is simply driven by a desire to only use as much energy as you're generating on the roof of your home. You might chortle if you're someone without solar, but let me tell you, that challenge is real. And surprisingly addictive, and it helps you to reduce your overall energy use. During the first Trump presidency, a bevy of different legislative efforts were made to prioritise fossil fuels, primarily oil and gas, over renewable energy. While he once claimed that he would put solar panels on the border wall with Mexico, it never actually materialised, and instead, President Trump continued his often bizarre attacks on any kind of renewable energy. He preferred instead to hype the use of fossil fuels and pushed ahead with the drill, baby, drill mentality. Within days of appointing former fossil fuel executive Scott Pruitt as head of the EPA, there was a sweeping set of changes at the agency made to remove the majority of the climate change information listed on the agency's website, as well as pages discussing renewable energy use. Instead, they were replaced with a picture of President Trump grinning alongside coal miners. And of course, many green pledges from the Obama administration before him were backtracked, reneged on, and ignored. President Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement and generally pushed the US backwards in terms of climate policy. Specifically for the solar industry, when the first Trump White House changed rules for the financing of solar panels and wind generation and increased existing tariffs on solar panels made overseas to a massive 30%, things were made tougher. It's worth noting here that when President Joe Biden came into the White House in 2020, he worked to change the tariffs, not eliminate them completely. There have been some form of tariffs on imported solar panels to the US for more than a decade now. Those changes in tariffs included a doubling of the allowance per company that can be imported into the US before tariffs are applied, as well as an exemption for bifacial solar panels. That, and of course, passing sweeping legislation designed to make it easier for companies to manufacture solar panels in the US. The largest investment in the US electrical grid since its inception, and ensure a revised tax code granting up to 30% in tax credits for qualifying installations. The important takeaway from the last Trump White House, though, is that while solar panel incentives didn't completely disappear, his first administration, which most political analysts admit was pretty disorganized and chaotic and haphazard, did make it harder for renewable energy generation to thrive, all while pushing back environmental protections and placing profit before planet. It was made harder, both financially and in some cases physically, for people to install solar panels and other renewable sources of energy generation. And while private sector investment in both the wind and solar industries did grow significantly during President Trump's first term, the focus was more on the business growth than individual sustainability. Many of the hurdles set in place by President Trump were then later reversed by President Biden, but it's not 100% clear that those reversals will stay in place for a second Trump term. And just like many other commentators have noted, we think the second Trump presidency is going to be more organised than the first, which means more of the stated goals we've heard on the campaign trail and promoted in Project 2025 will be achieved. Which brings me to some of the promises made on the campaign trail this time around. A lot was said on the campaign trail, both by candidate Trump and also a bevy of surrogates from the campaign. Conservative activists, many of whom have ties to the fossil fuel industry, for example, have been calling for a complete ending of any federal loan programs for clean energy and electric vehicles, essentially removing a potential line of credit for companies wanting to establish themselves as solar panel or renewable energy equipment manufacturers within the US. Some surrogates and donors want a complete abolishment of the various programs signed into law by President Biden, calling them un-American and socialist, and those are likely to include federal tax credits for solar panels. But for the most sweeping and devastating potential, we need to look at Project 2025, a massive tome authored by the conservative think tank at the Heritage Foundation, which many have suggested, despite the Trump campaign's attempts to distance themselves from it, will form the basis of policy decisions for the second Trump term from day one. I'm sure that you've heard about Project 2025 by now, so I'm not going to dig too far into it. As soon as there was significant outcry against it and some of its proposals, which cover everything from reproductive healthcare through to immigration and energy and what you can get up to in the comfort of your own home, the Trump presidential campaign worked very hard to distance itself from Project 2025's stated goals. However, in the week since the election, a surprising number of people that were involved in Heritage Foundation and Project 2025 seem to mysteriously have become attached to the Trump transition team and eventual cabinet positions. Project 2025 on page 696 calls for a complete repeal of tax incentives for renewable energy, and on page 382 calls for the elimination of the Department of Energy's demonstration programs designed to support and foster new, cleaner energy generation policies and programs. I'm just giving you two examples, but there are many, many more, including withdrawing again from the climate pledges made by the US on the global stage and allowing for wider exploitation of federal land for oil and gas exploration, coal mining, and the like. Add to that a campaign to completely remove the EPA and other agencies from existence, agencies which have traditionally helped promote renewable energy, talking about eliminating NOAA, one of our key agencies in helping predict catastrophic weather events. And I think you can see that the future looks pretty darned bleak. And that is before we even discuss the challenges in state legislatures around the US, where increasing Republican control based on a ticket that's historically been extremely hostile towards renewable energy and pro-climate protection policies could end up rewarding fossil fuel companies and either writing pro-fossil fuel anti-renewable legislation, as we're already starting to see in some states already, or eliminating regulation to the point that those are the biggest pockets end up winning. The effects, they are already being felt. Earlier this week, Enphase, a US-based solar energy company, announced it will be laying off around 500 staff, about 17% of its workforce around the world, citing a tough solar market in 2023 and a need to, quote, manage the continued economic challenges in the solar industry, end quote. While the company's CEO said publicly the decision was not related to the election, it comes on the heels of it, and there's definitely a bit of looking like a duck and quacking like a duck, so it's a duck. And if all of this has you feeling a little blue, don't worry, because if you are in the US, there's still time to get your solar panels installed before any dramatic changes are made to the US federal tax code or before regulation changes make it less welcoming for solar panels to be installed, which is where, thankfully, our sponsor for today's show comes in. Energy Sage helps homeowners connect with local verified solar installers across the US, and now heat pump specialists in select markets who really know their stuff and can help you navigate the process of installing solar panels, help you join a community solar program, or in fact get a heat pump installed. We used Energy Sage and we were looking for installers willing to help us put solar panels on the roof of our home, and our Energy Sage verified installers are professional, knowledgeable, and put us in touch with an amazing credit union that allowed us to finance our solar panels for as low a monthly payment as possible. So follow the links below to sign up for either of Energy Sage's free, no obligation services and get that ball rolling today. If you choose to use an Energy Sage installer for your project, we will also get a small referral fee, so you will also be helping out the channel. So you can help the grid get greener, save money, and support the show. It's a win-win-win. And now, back to the video. If you are feeling a little down by now, I wouldn't blame you. There's a lot that could potentially happen, and based on both past experience and what we're already seeing, cabinet positions are being filled by people whose primary qualifications for the role appear to be that they are super loyal to President Donald Trump. And that doesn't look good for solar moving forwards. It's likely that we will see a reduction or elimination of solar tax credits, as well as most other green energy and transportation tax credits. Just earlier today, we heard that the EV tax credits are going to go away. And even with Elon Musk involved at the cabinet level in the newly created Department of Government Efficiency, yes, that spells Doge, it's unlikely to be positive for companies that aren't owned or operated by Elon Musk. Elon Musk is vocally opposed to incentives and tax breaks and has opined that they should all be eliminated. And based on the conversations I've had with policy wonks and green energy wonks, it's expected that conflicts of interest will abound within the new White House administration. It's one of the reasons why analysts are citing that Tesla's stock soared after the election. There is an unwritten, unspoken expectation that Tesla will do better than its competitors under Trump because preferential treatment. And this is key. Dismantling an entire government's worth of agencies and policies is not going to happen overnight, no matter how hard attempts are made. It's likely to be met with hurdles either placed by staff, the current administration, or outside groups. We should expect a lot of legal cases to be claimed, some at the local level and some at the federal level. Cases that could potentially throw a little sugar in the fuel tank of a fossil-fueled presidency. Some things will happen quietly, while others will require a concerted effort to dismantle. Then there are the states themselves. Not all US states are sympathetic to the plans of a Project 2025 future, just as not all of the US population is. 23 US states currently have Democratic governors, and we can expect those states, many of whom have signed on to California's zero-emission mandate for EVs and clean energy, to work very hard to take exception to any attempts to push us back into the last industrial revolution. And regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, that's the inherent beauty of the current US government as it stands. There are checks and balances, and at least right now, nobody has king-like powers over the way that the US government operates. Right now. Sure, the Supreme Court is far more sympathetic to the wishes of the White House today than it was in 2016, but given that last Trump White House and its propensity for frequent staff changes and significant infighting, it might not be as plain sailing as many folks fear. And there's also the fact that, as of the time of writing and filming this script, a substantial number of nominations for cabinet positions are coming from Republicans on Capitol Hill. While some senators will get their seats filled by their state governor nominating someone to the position in the event they take up a role in the White House, others will require a special election to fill. And all House positions vacated by a politician shifting to the White House must be filled by special election. Given the high number of picks that are being made from Capitol Hill, rather than picking trained civil servants with special areas of expertise, we could see this undermine the majority rule that has already been confirmed in the Senate and has now been confirmed in the House. And despite what you may have heard, the margin of this election wasn't record-breaking. Donald Trump's second-term popular vote as a percentage of total votes is about 50.24% at the time of filming. That is below the numbers achieved by George W. Bush in 2004, Ronald Reagan in 1980, and both Presidents Barack Obama and Joe Biden in 2012 and 2020, respectively. In fact, if you want to go back far enough to see the highest percentages of the popular vote for a modern-day president, it was actually President Nixon in 1972. He scored more than 60% of the popular vote. But, and this is a big but, we just don't know. And we won't know for a while. It's a given that deregulation will follow shortly in the US. It's almost a given that we'll see a massive import tariff on any imported products from outside of the US, including solar panels. And this will not only impact the solar industry in the US, but in the greater part of the world. When one country starts a trade war, others invariably follow. Which brings me back to my original point. If you're able, and you are in a financial position to do so, now might be the time to get that solar installation you've been planning booked. We have made plenty of videos on the channel before about how to go about the process, and with more and more anti-green policies expected to come into effect to do everything to reduce solar panel tax credits to making it harder to install them, acting now is better than waiting. And if you are not convinced, well, even in so-called blue states, we're already starting to see the steady hand of corporate influence making itself felt. California's feed-in tariffs are worse now than they once were, and they're only expected to deteriorate further. But with energy prices set to continue to soar, no matter how energy is generated, making it at home will be cheaper. So making that investment to install solar could be the best thing you've decided to do on a cold fall night in the middle of November. Thanks for joining me today, and if you've got some thoughts, make sure you leave them in our Discord chat room, our Patreon page, or you can reach out to us on Mastodon. Thanks to the amazing list of people scrolling by on your screen right now. They are some of the more than 1,500 people who help fund this channel through Patreon and YouTube, covering our bills, paying our team, and making sure that we can remain 100% independent. If you'd like to join them and see your name listed here, just follow the links below. There are a range of different tiers that you can sign up for, from as little as $1 a month, or if you pay yearly, just over $10 a year. A huge welcome to our newest supporters: Alan Brim, Jim, Sarah Horlock, full name, Todd Johnson, Roderick, Stuart Despain, Rupert Ronson, Larry Phoenix, Darla, Wendy Kelly Bundenbaum, and Kay. To join the list and get your shout out, become a paid Patreon member for your moment of fame. If you'd like to support us with a one-off donation, you'll also find links below to make Ko-fi and Bitcoin donations, and we even have a good old-fashioned PO box you can reach us at, address also linked below. And of course, if you're in need of some swag, you'll find our swag store in the down below. We've also got some great content coming up, so make sure you're subscribed on PeerTube or YouTube, and we'll see you soon. We make new videos every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. If you want more, the mighty algorithm thinks you'll like this video, but we also think this one is well worth a look. See you soon, and as always, keep evolving!